What if I told you that while the DEA is tracking every wire transfer, every bank account, every financial move the cartels make, billions of dollars are flowing right under their noses through a system so simple, so elegant, that it's practically invisible? You know the Sinaloa Cartel, the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world. But what you don't know is how they've turned their biggest problem, hiding mountains of cash, into their greatest advantage. Meet the shadow bankers of Beijing, the money brokers who've created a financial pipeline that makes El Chapo's tunnels look like child's play. Today we dive into the underground economy that moves cartel billions without a single dollar crossing a border, without touching a single American bank, and without leaving a trace the US government can follow. This is the story of how the Sinaloa Cartel hides their billions, and it's one that will change how you see the global economy forever. The Sinaloa Cartel wasn't born in boardrooms or back alleys. It was forged in the mountains of northwestern Mexico, in a state where poverty and opportunity dance together like partners in a deadly waltz. Founded in the late 1980s, the Sinaloa Cartel emerged from the ashes of the Guadalajara Cartel. When Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, known as El Padrino, was arrested in 1989, his empire fractured into smaller, hungrier organizations. But one group had vision beyond the others. Led initially by Hector Luis Palma Salazar and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the Sinaloa Cartel understood something their competitors didn't. This wasn't just about moving drugs. This was about building a business empire that could rival multinational corporations. From their stronghold in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa State, they began constructing what would become the most sophisticated drug trafficking network in history. They recruited farmers, chemists, tunnel engineers, pilots, and accountants. They built laboratories that could produce methamphetamine and fentanyl with pharmaceutical precision. But here's what made them different. While other cartels fought over territory, the Sinaloa Cartel focused on efficiency. They created supply chains that would make Amazon jealous. They established distribution networks that reached from the poppy fields of the Golden Triangle to the street corners of Chicago. By the early 2000s, they controlled an estimated 40 to 60% of all drugs entering the United States. That's not just impressive. That's a monopoly that generates between $3 billion and $39 billion annually, depending on whose estimates you believe. The Sinaloa Cartel operates like a Fortune 500 company with a very illegal product line. Their organizational structure is so sophisticated that business schools could teach case studies on their operational efficiency. At the top sits the Leadership Council, a group of high-level bosses who make strategic decisions. Below them are regional commanders who oversee specific territories and trafficking routes. Each region operates semi-independently, reducing the risk that taking down one cell will collapse the entire organization. Their revenue streams are diversified like any smart business. Cocaine remains their bread and butter, sourced primarily from Colombia and processed in mobile labs throughout Mexico. They've cornered the market on fentanyl production, using precursor chemicals imported from China to manufacture pills that are 50 times more potent than heroin. But they don't stop at traditional drugs. The Sinaloa Cartel has expanded into methamphetamine production, human trafficking, kidnapping for ransom, and even legitimate businesses like construction, agriculture, and transportation companies that serve as fronts for money laundering. Here's where it gets interesting. They operate with military precision. They use encrypted communications, employ former military personnel, and maintain intelligence networks that rival government agencies. They have informants in law enforcement, customs officials on their payroll, and politicians in their pocket. Their logistics network is breathtaking. They move drugs through a combination of tunnels, submarines, drones, catapults, and even legitimate shipping containers. They've built tunnels under the US-Mexico border that are equipped with ventilation systems, lighting, and rail tracks. Some of these tunnels are more sophisticated than subway systems. The numbers are staggering. Conservative estimates suggest they move 200 tons of cocaine into the United States annually. That's 400,000 pounds of pure cocaine, worth approximately $20 billion at street value. Add in fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin, and you're looking at an organization that generates more revenue than many countries' entire GDP. The journey of Sinaloa Cartel drugs to American streets is a masterclass in logistics that would impress any supply chain manager. But unlike Amazon packages, these shipments carry life sentences if intercepted. It starts in the source countries. Cocaine begins its journey in the remote laboratories of Colombia, hidden deep in the jungle where government forces rarely venture. The cartel maintains direct relationships with Colombian producers, cutting out middlemen and maximizing profits. They provide upfront payments, security, and transportation in exchange for exclusive access to the highest quality product. From Colombia, the cocaine travels north through a network of routes that change constantly to avoid detection. Some shipments move by sea, loaded onto fishing boats, cargo ships, or custom-built submarines that can carry up to 10 tons of cocaine per trip. These narco-subs are engineering marvels, semi-submersible vessels that travel just below the surface, nearly invisible to radar and satellite detection. Other shipments travel overland through Central America, moving through Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras in convoys protected by heavily armed security teams. The cartel has corrupted officials at every level in these countries, creating safe corridors for their products. But the real innovation happens at the US-Mexico border. This is where Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the cartel's longtime leader, proved his genius. Instead of fighting the border, he decided to go under it, over it, and through it simultaneously. Tunnel network is legendary. These aren't crude holes in the ground. They're sophisticated transportation systems. The tunnel discovered in 2016 between Tijuana and San Diego was 2,400 feet long, equipped with lighting, ventilation, and a rail system. It had multiple entry and exit points, and investigators estimated it had been in operation for years. Above ground, they use legitimate businesses as cover. Trucking companies, produce importers, and manufacturing facilities all serve as fronts for drug smuggling. They hide cocaine in shipments of avocados, peppers, and auto parts. They've even used legitimate passenger vehicles with drugs hidden in specially constructed compartments that require specific sequences to open. The cartel also pioneered the use of drones for drug smuggling, capable of carrying 20 to 30 pounds of drugs across the border in minutes. They've used catapults to launch drug packages over border walls, and they've even employed tunnel boring machines typically used for subway construction. Once drugs cross into the United States, the distribution network takes over. The cartel maintains cells in major cities across America: Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and dozens of others. These cells operate like franchises, with local managers who handle street-level distribution while sending profits back to Mexico. The sophistication is remarkable. They use encrypted communications, code words, and counter-surveillance techniques. They rotate personnel regularly to avoid detection and maintain multiple backup plans for every operation. Here's where the Sinaloa Cartel faces their biggest challenge. What do you do with billions of dollars in cash when you can't put it in a bank? Think about the scale we're talking about. If the cartel generates $20 billion annually and most transactions are conducted in cash, they're dealing with a logistical nightmare. $20 billion in $20 bills weighs approximately 1,000 tons. That's the weight of 200 elephants in cash that needs to be moved, stored, and converted into usable assets. Traditional money laundering methods have become increasingly difficult. The U.S. government has implemented sophisticated tracking systems that monitor large cash deposits, wire transfers, and suspicious financial activity. Banks are required to report any transaction over $10,000, and they've become experts at identifying patterns that suggest money laundering. The cartel tried the classic approaches. They bought legitimate businesses, restaurants, car dealerships, construction companies, and used them to clean dirty money. They recruited Smurfs, individuals who would make small deposits below reporting thresholds across multiple banks. They invested in real estate, purchasing properties with cash and then selling them to create a paper trail of legitimate income. But these methods are slow, inefficient, and increasingly risky. The DEA and IRS have become sophisticated at tracking these patterns. They use artificial intelligence to identify suspicious financial activity, and they've built databases that can connect seemingly unrelated transactions across multiple institutions. The cartel needed something better, something that could move massive amounts of money quickly, efficiently, and invisibly, something that could operate outside the reach of U.S. financial surveillance. That's when they discovered the Chinese connection. The solution came from an unexpected source: China's strict capital controls. and the desires of wealthy Chinese citizens to move money abroad. China maintains rigid restrictions on how much money its citizens can legally transfer out of the country. Officially, Chinese nationals can only move $50,000 per year abroad. But China's wealthy elite, business owners, real estate developers, corrupt officials want to move millions, sometimes billions, out of China to protect their wealth from government seizure or economic instability. This creates a massive black market demand for dollars outside of China, while simultaneously creating a supply of yuan inside China that needs to be converted. It's a perfect match for the cartel's problem. Here's how the system works in principle. The cartel has millions of dollars in cash in the United States that they can't safely deposit in American banks. Wealthy Chinese individuals have millions of yuan in China that they want to convert to dollars and move abroad. A network of money brokers facilitates an exchange without any money actually crossing borders. The beauty of this system is its simplicity. No wire transfers, no bank records, no SWIFT transactions, no traditional financial institutions involved. The money never moves internationally. It just changes hands locally in each country. Chinese money brokers, often called underground bankers or alternative remittance systems, have been operating these networks for decades. They originally served legitimate purposes, helping Chinese immigrants send money to family members or facilitating trade transactions. But the scale and sophistication have exploded as both cartel money and Chinese capital flight have increased. These brokers maintain networks of associates in major cities around the world. They use encrypted communications, code words, and sophisticated accounting systems to track transactions. They charge fees ranging from 1% to 5% of the transaction value, making this an extremely lucrative business. The system operates on trust and reputation. Brokers who fail to deliver on their promises quickly find themselves out of business, or worse. The amounts involved are so large that a single transaction might involve $10 million or more. Let me walk you through exactly how a cartel money laundering transaction works through the Chinese banking system. Step 1. The cartel has $10 million in cash sitting in a warehouse in Los Angeles. This money came from drug sales across the United States, collected by their distribution network and transported to consolidation points. Step 2. The cartel contacts a Chinese money broker, either directly or through intermediaries. These brokers often operate out of businesses like import/export companies, currency exchanges, or trading firms. The initial contact might happen through encrypted messaging apps or coded phone calls. Step 3. The broker quotes a rate. Let's say they'll provide 6.5 million yuan in China in exchange for the $10 million in Los Angeles, keeping $500,000 as their fee. The rate fluctuates based on demand, risk, and current exchange rates. Step 4. The cartel agrees and provides the cash to the broker's associates in Los Angeles. This might happen at a legitimate business, a restaurant, import company, or trading firm. The cash is counted, verified, and held by the broker's U.S. operation. Step 5. Simultaneously, the broker instructs their associates in China to deliver 6.5 million yuan to representatives of the cartel's Chinese business partners. This might be a shell company the cartel has established in China, or it might be a legitimate Chinese business that has agreed to participate in the scheme. Step 6. The cartel now has 6.5 million yuan in China, which they can use to purchase legitimate goods, electronics, machinery, chemicals, or other products. These purchases create a paper trail of legitimate business transactions. Step 7. The cartel's Mexican companies import these Chinese goods, paying for them with the yuan that originated from their drug money. The transaction appears completely legitimate. A Mexican company purchasing goods from a Chinese supplier and paying in Chinese currency. Step 8. The cartel sells these imported goods in Mexico, either through their legitimate businesses or to other companies. The proceeds from these sales are now clean money that can be deposited in Mexican banks, invested in real estate, or used for any other purpose. The entire process takes days or weeks compared to traditional money laundering methods that might take months or years. More importantly, it creates multiple layers of legitimate-looking transactions that are extremely difficult for law enforcement to trace. The cartel's choice of China as their money laundering partner isn't accidental. It's strategically brilliant. First, there's the obvious factor. the United States and China are economic and political rivals. While they maintain diplomatic relations and extensive trade, they're also engaged in a complex competition for global influence. This tension creates opportunities for activities that operate in the gray areas between the two systems. China's financial system operates independently of U.S. oversight. Chinese banks don't automatically share information with American authorities. While there are some cooperation agreements, the process of obtaining financial records from China is slow, bureaucratic, and often unsuccessful. By the time U.S. investigators request information about specific transactions, the money has already moved through multiple accounts and been converted into legitimate assets. Second, China's capital controls create the perfect cover. The Chinese government restricts capital outflows to protect their currency and prevent capital flight. But these restrictions create enormous demand for alternative methods of moving money abroad. The cartel's dollars provide a solution to this problem, making their money laundering operation appear to be serving a legitimate economic need. Third, the sheer volume of legitimate trade between China and Mexico provides perfect camouflage. Mexico imports over $80 billion worth of goods from China annually. Electronics, machinery, textiles, chemicals, and manufactured goods flow constantly between the two countries. Cartel transactions blend seamlessly into this massive, legitimate trade flow. Fourth, Chinese money brokers have decades of experience operating alternative remittance systems. They understand how to structure transactions to avoid detection, how to maintain operational security, and how to build networks that can handle enormous volumes of money. They're not amateurs, they're professionals who have been perfecting these techniques for generations. The cultural factor is also important. Chinese business culture values long-term relationships, discretion, and mutual benefit. Once trust is established, these relationships can last for decades. The brokers understand that their success depends on maintaining absolute confidentiality and delivering on their promises. Finally, there's the enforcement challenge. U.S. law enforcement agencies have limited jurisdiction in China. They can't conduct undercover operations, make arrests, or seize assets without Chinese government cooperation. Even when they identify specific money laundering networks, actually disrupting them requires complex international cooperation that can take years to arrange. The Chinese connection is just one part of a sophisticated global money laundering network that the Sinaloa Cartel has constructed over decades. The cartel maintains shell companies in dozens of countries: Mexico, the United States, China, Panama, the Cayman Islands, and others. These companies exist on paper but have no real business operations. They serve as vehicles for moving money, creating false documentation, and providing cover for financial transactions. In Mexico, the cartel operates hundreds of legitimate businesses that serve dual purposes. Construction companies build real projects while also providing cover for money laundering. Agricultural businesses export real products while also facilitating drug smuggling. Transportation companies move legitimate cargo while also moving drugs and cash. These Mexican companies establish business relationships with Chinese firms, creating a web of legitimate-looking commercial transactions. A cartel-controlled construction company in Sinaloa might purchase steel and concrete from a Chinese supplier. The payment for these materials comes from yuan that originated as drug money, but the transaction appears completely legitimate. The cartel has also invested heavily in Chinese real estate, manufacturing, and technology companies. These investments serve multiple purposes. They provide a way to park large amounts of money. They generate legitimate returns, and they create additional layers of complexity that make it difficult for investigators to trace the original source of the funds. Some of these investments are surprisingly sophisticated. The cartel has reportedly invested in Chinese pharmaceutical companies that produce precursor chemicals used in drug manufacturing. They've invested in shipping companies that facilitate their smuggling operations. They've even invested in technology companies that develop encryption software and communication systems. The beauty of this system is that it creates a circular flow of money that becomes increasingly difficult to trace. Drug money becomes yuan. Yuan becomes investments. Investments generate returns. Returns become legitimate business income. Each step in the process adds another layer of complexity and legal protection. U.S. law enforcement agencies understand the Chinese money laundering system, but stopping it is incredibly difficult. The DEA, FBI, and Treasury Department have identified numerous Chinese money brokers and their networks. They've conducted undercover operations, made arrests, and seized millions of dollars. But for every network they disrupt, two more seem to take its place. The fundamental problem is jurisdictional. The most important parts of these operations happen in China, where U.S. agencies have no authority to operate. They can arrest the American associates of these networks, but the core infrastructure remains in China, protected by Chinese sovereignty and banking secrecy laws. Even when U.S. agencies identify specific Chinese money brokers, actually prosecuting them is nearly impossible. China rarely extradites its citizens to face charges in foreign countries. Chinese authorities might shut down specific operations if they become too visible, but they rarely provide the level of cooperation that would be needed to completely dismantle these networks. The scale of the problem is also overwhelming. Estimates suggest that Chinese money brokers launder between $20 billion and $50 billion annually for various criminal organizations, not just drug cartels. The Sinaloa Cartel is just one client in a massive underground economy that serves everyone from corrupt Chinese officials to international arms dealers. Technology makes the problem even more complex. Modern money brokers use encrypted communications, cryptocurrency, and sophisticated accounting software to manage their operations. They can move money through dozens of accounts in multiple countries within hours, making it nearly impossible for investigators to track transactions in real time. The legitimate trade relationship between China and Mexico also provides perfect cover. With billions of dollars in legitimate transactions flowing between the two countries every month, identifying the relatively small percentage that represents money laundering is like finding needles in a haystack. Today, the Sinaloa Cartel's money laundering operation through Chinese networks is more sophisticated than ever. Recent investigations have revealed that the system has evolved beyond simple currency exchange. The cartel now uses Chinese brokers to facilitate complex investment schemes, real estate purchases, and even cryptocurrency transactions. They've adapted to increased law enforcement pressure by developing new methods and expanding into new markets. The COVID-19 pandemic actually accelerated these trends. As traditional money laundering methods became more difficult due to increased banking scrutiny and reduced cash transactions, the cartel relied even more heavily on alternative remittance systems. The pandemic also increased Chinese capital flight, as wealthy Chinese citizens sought to protect their assets from economic uncertainty. Recent arrests have provided glimpses into the current scale of these operations. In 2023, U.S. authorities arrested several Chinese money brokers who were allegedly laundering over $50 million annually for various criminal organizations. The investigation revealed networks that spanned dozens of cities and involved hundreds of participants. But these arrests barely scratched the surface. Intelligence estimates suggest that Chinese money brokers now handle the majority of cartel money laundering operations. The old methods, cash-intensive businesses, real estate purchases, traditional banking, have become secondary to the Chinese connection. The cartel has also begun using these networks for purposes beyond money laundering. They use Chinese brokers to purchase precursor chemicals for drug manufacturing, to acquire sophisticated equipment and technology, and even to facilitate arms purchases. The relationship has evolved from a simple financial service to a comprehensive criminal partnership. Law enforcement agencies are adapting their strategies, but they're always playing catch-up. They've increased cooperation with Chinese authorities, developed new technologies for tracking financial flows, and created specialized units focused on alternative remittance systems. But the fundamental advantages that make these systems attractive to criminals, speed, efficiency, and invisibility, also make them extremely difficult to combat. The Sinaloa Cartel's use of Chinese money laundering networks has implications that extend far beyond drug trafficking. This system has become a model for other criminal organizations around the world. Russian oligarchs use similar networks to move money out of Russia. African kleptocrats use them to hide stolen government funds. Terrorist organizations use them to finance operations. What started as a solution to the cartel's specific problem has become a cornerstone of global financial crime. The economic impact is staggering. Estimates suggest that alternative remittance systems now handle hundreds of billions of dollars annually in illicit transactions. This money flows outside of regulated financial systems, avoiding taxes, oversight, and legal accountability. It represents a shadow economy that operates parallel to legitimate financial markets. The geopolitical implications are equally significant. These networks exploit the gaps and tensions between different national financial systems. They take advantage of regulatory differences, enforcement limitations, and political conflicts. In some ways, they represent a form of financial warfare that undermines the effectiveness of international sanctions and law enforcement cooperation. The human cost is immeasurable. The drugs that generate the money flowing through these networks kill over 100,000 Americans annually. The violence associated with drug trafficking has destabilized entire regions of Mexico and Central America. The corruption required to maintain these networks undermines democratic institutions and the rule of law. Yet the system continues to grow and evolve. As long as there are strict capital controls in China, demand for dollars outside the banking system, and massive profits from drug trafficking, these networks will continue to operate and expand. The Sinaloa Cartel has solved the ultimate criminal puzzle: how to hide billions of dollars in plain sight. By exploiting the gap between Chinese capital controls and American drug profits, they've created a money laundering system that's faster, more efficient, and more secure than anything law enforcement has seen before. They've turned China's financial restrictions into their greatest asset, and America's war on drugs into a profitable business opportunity. What started as a regional drug trafficking organization in the mountains of Sinaloa has evolved into a global financial network that moves billions of dollars across continents without leaving a trace. They've proven that in the modern economy, money doesn't need to cross borders to change hands. It just needs to change ownership. The next time you hear about record drug seizures or cartel arrests, remember this: for every dollar seized, 10 more flow invisibly through networks that operate beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement. The real war isn't being fought in the mountains of Mexico or the streets of American cities. It's being fought in the shadow banking systems of the global economy. Subscribe to Inform Secreto to continue exploring the hidden stories behind power. Real stories told unfiltered, because what you don't see also controls the world. See you soon.